VIX again stowing at that 50-period moving average, the green line. We had dropped over here. Again, I told you bullish signals before the presidential election. We had the election results, and we saw this big gap down on the VIX. We could move back towards the 200-period moving average and the lower end of the band. Those bullish signals on the 60-minute chart gave us the big rally they did, and that is what has happened. We've rallied up to the 50 period. The 50 is still above the 200, warning, hey, likely in a topping process. We've dropped back down in order to complete that process on the S&P 500. Get the 50 above the 200 period can lead to a topping process. Now we've had bearish signals that have led to this pullback. Momentum line remains bearish, although we never did get a bearish reversal of conditions with momentum on the S&P daily chart. The momentum here did go negative. I think we'll see the awesome oscillator turn back up and momentum here turn back up, and I think you're going to end up forming new all-time highs in all likelihood. But as I've talked about, the other possibility is we go back and we fill the gap down here. We go back and we fill the gap and hit the trend line again on the S&P 500, or maybe expand it and form a channel. Certainly possible. I've talked about both of those scenarios. Fill the gap on the S&P. NASDAQ has not done it yet. Again, we'll be watching to see if we rally next week with our short trading week. Watching these lows to see if they hold. We bounced off the 20-period moving average not seen on this chart. Trend signals here are still bullish. Cloud did flip, which means we're either going to start going down bigger or we're going sideways. And again, probably, in my opinion, we'll see new all-time highs whenever this correction is done, and maybe it's done now. So we'll see what happens. Exact signals here on NASDAQ. Again, momentum has been bearish and still hanging in there except for the cloud, but still possibility we go back and fill these gaps. We're at the major trend line of support on NASDAQ, so we'll be watching to see what all unfolds. Momentum still negative. Again, that's got to turn positive. Momentum line here has got to flip back to bullish if we're going to try to get a bigger rally. And again, we did not fill that gap. We're still to bounce, but we did not fill the gap yet. Momentum and trend signals turning back to bullish today here on the S&P 500. So again, we've talked about a larger divergence developing here on the RSI intraday, like some of these other divergences, maybe a brand new one. But again, personal belief is the S&P is going to move to a new all-time high. Now here, intraday again, we saw momentum flip. The trend didn't quite do it here, but we did see the balance of power flip back to bullish intraday. So again, you can see the momentum line turn back to bullish in the daily time frame. A few more signals here intraday turning back to bullish. We may see the S&P reach those target levels. But again, and here again, signals back to bullish. I think we're going to see divergences develop on intraday charts. Please rally the cloud. Please support the channel with the link directly below. That allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, please take a moment to support the channel. I do need to hear from you in order to make it work. If you could take the time to do that, I would really appreciate it. Follow the link below. Take you to a secure site. You could donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. I thank you for your consideration for that. We have the risk model. We're still in a risk-on environment. Even with the pullback I told you was going to happen, the rally that I told you was going to happen based on those 60-minute charts. And I think it's likely the S&P is going to move to a new all-time high to reach my objective target. It'll diverge with the RSI, likely here with momentum, a risk-on divergence. Risk-on means we have positive momentum. Risk-off is negative momentum. So again, I think you got a good shot at S&P forming a divergence, because even with this pullback that we've had, last Thursday it would evolve into a larger pullback. Possible it's not done yet, but it's likely. S&P will end up moving to a new all-time high to reach the objective target in the weekly and the monthly time frames. The S&P trend remains bullish, and we remain in a risk-on environment. And quickly, when we top, the volatility oscillator will turn back above the signal line showing volatility has returned and stay above it. I think we're getting something like what we had, here's the S&P up here, like we had in the 2022, at the 2022 top, where volatility dropped the S&P. We got one final push higher, then it began to reverse, and we saw volatility increased. We got above the signal line with the volatility oscillator and remained there, and we saw that big sharp decline. This looks very, very similar, as I talked about, this push down, this push back up, and now this push down with this little push back up. Looks very, very similar, down, up, and again, if we push back just a little bit, you could get that final blow off top completing on the S&P 500. But just something I'm paying attention to. When we get back up on the signal line, it will validate peak and likely usher in a completed top and usher in a reversal and probably a bear market. Begin to see those weekly signals play out. S&P trend direction, I think, is going to push back up here for one final push higher. I think that will reach my objective targets in the weekly and the monthly time frame, and then I think it's going to go negative after that. Once it does, the trend will change. I think it's going to be very, very similar to what we had over here, but I think the trend is going to turn up and be completing this multiple point diversions. I think we're going to see the volatility oscillator drop as volatility drops on the S&P, probably on lighter volume. It's back above there. Unless we start seeing weekly divergences begin to play out, technical damage. My guess is we're going to get a new all-time high. Open-minded, again, the topping process can unfold in a couple different ways. Again, I'm just telling you what I think. We're going to move to a new all-time high. My objective targets, that's why I think we're going to go higher. Still haven't reached the trend line in the monthly time frame. For channel in the weekly time frame, I think you're going to see a reversal there and a top likely complete, putting the finishing touches on a blow off top, but I don't think it's done yet. It is done. I need to see more evidence of that. Again, this is going to tell me when it's done, the S&P trend direction turns negative and remains there, and when we start getting above the signal line with the volatility on the S&P 500, it's going to mark a peak and a reversal. I don't have that yet. So again, something I'll be watching for. Mark the exact top, it will confirm it. Likely right after it happens, shortly after it happens, probably within a week or two, it will confirm it. Back above the signal line and the trend direction going negative. Okay, the rally continues. The VIX last Friday predicted we would have a bounce or a bottom come Monday or Tuesday. The VIX was correct again. Had the NVIDIA sell-off with earnings after the bell yesterday. Let me just flip over to NVIDIA real fast. It ended up rallying back up with pre-market trading. The futures rise back up, and we actually went up to this trend line right here at the open here. We opened up, and then we went up to that level and reversed. Went down to the 20 period, went down to horizontal support here at 140.75, and then rebounded back up. And we ended up closing just over 0.5% higher. Again, I believe that NVIDIA is likely in a topping process at major resistance. I went through it in great length and detail. You want to see the NVIDIA charts, watch yesterday's video. I went through that. We're stalling here at this upper boundary of the rising wedge, at least so far. And again, this is just right below a major trend line, just like S&P and NASDAQ. Long-term trend lines, well, NVIDIA is right below it, similar to the S&P 500. The monthly time frame. Again, one thing to consider, does the NASDAQ need NVIDIA to top? Well, over here, NVIDIA already peaked in June. It sold off. It got a lower high in July. Diverged with NASDAQ, which did peak in July on July 10th. NASDAQ has moved slightly higher to the trend lines of resistance or towards them, as NVIDIA didn't need to make new highs for the NASDAQ to get a new high and top out. It may form divergence. It still may just fill the gap. NASDAQ still may just diverge with the S&P 500. We'll have to watch and see. We're moving now into Thanksgiving week, which again is historically a positive week for the market. Bullish week for the market. Again, I am looking for a topping process to complete. Nevertheless, I digress. The Dow was up 462 points, rounding up just over 1%. Still under that 44,000 area. We're going to be watching that. We'll be watching to see if the Dow moves to a new high or not. Sometimes also diverge with the S&P 500, which again, I believe the S&P will reach my objective target in the monthly and the weekly time frame, and that's that mid 6,000 area to the 6,100 area, right between 6,040 or so to 6,199. That range right in there. I think we're going to see the blow off top complete. Still back up below 6,000, but we rallied up 0.5% on the S&P, up 30, almost 32 points to 59.49, rounding up. Again, that is the gap fill, 59, that 59.50 area there. The closing basis of 59.49 did fill today on the S&P 500. NASDAQ was up slightly. The Russell was up 1.65, the best performer of the four. The VIX was down 1.69% to close back below 17. Earnings from NVIDIA, it's stalling here near the trend line of resistance. This is blown up right here. Let me just show you. Time frame NVIDIA, we got this channel right here, and we've come right up to this upper boundary of the parallel channel right here. Again, burner in this area could overthrow it just a little bit and turn, forming that rising wedge in the daily time frame. We have this longer term channel from the 2022 low. It was at this trend line where we saw NVIDIA peak in June. And again, when the CEO began to do aggressive selling, we saw NVIDIA drop. Just let it rise back up. Again, probably going to end up doing a whole lot more selling. Seen that from a lot of billionaires like Jeff Bezos. Sell, they let it rise back up, and then they sell some more. Just be aware of, we're in this area right here, and we're tagging this trend line. We overthrew it a little bit before. Be aware of this level on NVIDIA. You should be paying attention to NVIDIA because it's got the same pattern on it as the NASDAQ 100. Now again, we have the rising wedges, and again, rising wedges, sometimes you get an overthrow, sometimes you don't, but again, the rising wedge is a fairly reliable reversal pattern. This rising wedge could end up producing a double top or a head and shoulders pattern. Again, we're likely going to go back to this August low here near the 90 level. NVIDIA, as we get the peak in. We did make a new all-time high on an intraday basis today. We're forming this large negative divergence, and again, negative divergence, the most powerful reversal signal in technical analysis, triple and quadruple negative divergences, and we got the divergence here on the MACD. So just be aware of NVIDIA. Again, it was a blowout earnings. Experts and on social media saying that NVIDIA was just going to erupt higher like a volcano. Ended up selling off and getting a slight gain there the close of the session. We'll see how it closes out by the end of the week, but we are going into a positive week. But again, just going back to the daily chart, again, the NASDAQ's forming a very similar looking pattern here with the rising wedge moving above the previous peak in the summer. Even though they diverged, very, very similar pattern. Very similar situation here on the NASDAQ. It was up 0.36% today, up about 78 points. The P filled the gap on an intraday basis. NASDAQ did not. It hit a high of 20,000, just over 20,800, and moved off of the highs to close at 20,740. Again, I think this 20,900 area here, this gap fill is going to get filled. I'll be watching, though. Does NASDAQ diverge with S&P? They both form divergences on indicators like the RSI and the MACD. We'll be watching. Sometimes NASDAQ and S&P diverge, as I've talked so much about, but again, it doesn't always play out that way, but sometimes it does. Over here at the July peak, they did diverge. So we'll be watching. Maybe we go higher and then they diverge. We reach the objective target level on the S&P 500. And just quickly, here is the 60-minute chart of NASDAQ. Again, right here is where S&P and NASDAQ diverged. I told you that was bullish for the market. He also formed bullish divergence there with the RSI. We've got a confirmation of higher low here for NASDAQ. And I warned you we were likely going to see a rally and probably new highs, new all-time highs with both because of these warning signs ahead of the election. Then we reached the extremes, and I told you again, did that before the sell-off happened, that we were going to go down, see prices pull back. I told you I didn't know at that time if it would be a deep pullback or a shallow pullback, but then Thursday, my momentum signal started turning back to bearish. Last Thursday, we were going to get a bigger pullback. I warned you about that, and we gapped down sharply there on Friday. Those have been absolutely amazing. Now we're rallying back up off of the 200. We didn't quite fill the gap down here at 20,227. We're rallying towards this 20,900 area. Again, watching, do we confirm a lower high or do we blow past this peak over here and again form a divergence and go back up towards the upper boundary here on the daily the daily chart here. So we'll be watching to see how it unfolds. Got a possible head and shoulders if this high holds. We are moving into a very bullish week for the market, the week of Thanksgiving. Get Black Friday and all the rest of it. So again, a short trading week, and we'll see abbreviated sessions. NASDAQ is stalling at the 10-period moving average. It rose back up and it stalled at the red line there. That's the red period. We still have momentum bearish here for the NASDAQ. And I told you, I think that we're going to see green bars here. I think we're going to turn back up and likely form a divergence or confirm a lower high once we fill the gap one or the other. The S&P will make new highs. Not sure yet about the NASDAQ. I think it very well could, though, diverge once we make new highs. Why we saw a peak on the NASDAQ, and then 6 sessions later, then the S&P put in its top, and they had a divergence. We're both rallying strong. So we very well could see new highs, but I do think you're going to see green awesome oscillator bars. Now, again, I've been watching. Are we going to go negative here? Are we going to get green? My guess is you're going to get green, and you're going to see the gap fill here, and then we'll see if we can make new highs. And again, let me be clear. We very well may make new highs, NASDAQ and S&P. I'm looking for the blow-off top to come to a conclusion, to complete. I think for S&P, it completes at higher levels, and it may be that we complete at little bit higher levels for NASDAQ as well. Open-minded to a lower high scenario. That's all I'm saying. But I'm looking for the completion of the topping process. Again, because I told you back over here, we're going to come back and fill this gap eventually, and then either, again, make a lower high or try to move to a higher high. If I was wrong about this peak, I had good reason to think there was a peak there because of the major trend lines in the weekly and the monthly time frame, which we're now up testing again. If we exceeded that peak, we would go up and test those levels again. It's likely we're going to return off of them. Just like NVIDIA, it turned off previously off the June high was at the trend line that we're at right now. Good chance we're going to turn off of it again here in November or maybe December that we're going to see it. But likely, very good chance we're in the final phase, I should say, of the topping process. As we rally back up to, and NASDAQ was up 0.36%, up 74 points. As we're rallying back up, we still have a bearish reversal of conditions as far as momentum here, but we did get back above the 20. We're just below the 10. I think we see green bars here, but as we're doing this, attempting to recover off of Friday's gap lower, last Friday's gap lower. Again, we're coming back towards a 10-week moving average on NASDAQ. We've got a red bar on the awesome oscillator. Again, you've got this divergence going on. You've got it here with the MACD. Again, you get these red bars, the first, second, or third bar, and you end up getting a counter trend, which is what we're trying to do now, or you move to a new high. And again, NASDAQ may not be done making the highs. There's still room to run. Signals are still bullish, but they're forming divergences. Holding above the 10-week moving average, the red line here. The cloud is still green. The bars are still blue. See this begin to turn, will likely mark a top in the weekly time frame here. That weekly chart here. Same thing going on with the S&P 500. Again, everything's bullish. Okay, we're above that 10-week moving average, but you've got the red bar. You've got a multiple point divergence developing here. Okay, last red bar gave us a sideways move, a pullback before the presidential election. Putting the finishing touches on the topping process, but again, listen carefully. The S&P is likely going to go to new all-time highs. I'll say it again. The S&P is going to complete the blow-off top with probably another new all-time high. That's my personal belief. I have the guts to tell you what I think. In the S&P 500 daily, you got your stochastic turning back up now. MACD is probably going to turn back up, and you're probably going to see a divergence. Awesome oscillator will probably get green bars going into our Thanksgiving week. Maybe by tomorrow, by the close of this week, we'll see what happens. Again, we've tried to flip the cloud a couple times. We've got the red bars, but we've tried to flip the cloud. We've been unable to close below the cloud. The S&P cash, NASDAQ did, and again, we're stalling at the 10-period moving average. We'll see if we can rally up further. Risk is that we still come back down and fill this gap first near the 50-period moving average. I talked about both of those scenarios. I told you regardless, whichever one plays out, I still believe that we're going to go make new all-time highs. Great Scott, did you hear what I said? Yes, I believe we're still going to go make new all-time highs. Whether the correction is now done and we are coming back up to fill the gap, or whether we get one final pullback into filling the gap here on the NASDAQ. on the S&P daily chart. NASDAQ still never did quite fill that gap. Still may to get above these 10-period moving averages. NASDAQ has now filled the gap up here. S&P did at that 59.50 area. NASDAQ has that gap fill just under 20,900. It did not fill the gap. S&P did. Again, I told you that, again, we could come down and hit this trend line right here and fill the gap. It's directly underneath that at the 50 period. Or, again, just bounce here, go back up and fill the gap and move to new highs. Those are the two scenarios I talked about. I told you I was looking for that gap fill. We did get it today at that 59.50 area. We got that today. It was just under the gap there. Again, end up getting a bigger pullback. This could evolve into a channel. Okay, so do keep that in mind, that still a possibility. Regardless how this correction unfolds, again, I believe we're going to go make a new high. Whether we come down and then come back up, even come down further and form a channel, but then come back up. I still think we're going to see new all-time highs on the S&P 500 to reach my objective target in the monthly and the weekly time frame. Again, we'll be watching to see if we get a divergence here in the most recent price action on the RSI and the MACD. The MACD had a Class B divergence, and that gave us this pullback. I told you it was going to happen. Again, at this high right here and this high right here, I told you those two highs, we're going to get a pullback. Then I told you right here, we're going to get a deeper pullback because the signal started turning bearish. Momentum on the intraday charts. Warning sign, I told you about that. Told you we were going to get the rally here off the 50-period moving average. Still expecting that we're going to get new all-time highs. So we'll see if these lows can hold here. We pull back and then get a bigger move higher. We'll be looking to see how it unfolds. Regardless, I think we'll see new all-time highs. Complete the blow off top. It's usually peak with a blow off top. It creates total complacency. Bears throwing in the towel, the bulls believing there's no possible way the market can go down, and then that's usually when it tops out. S&P up just over 4%, up about just over 32 points, coming back and filling the gap. So again, do we come back and we fill this gap down here, and then try to go higher, or we do it right here and right now? So we'll be watching. Do we form a brand new fresh divergence here, or do we build upon this one over here? This support level continues to hold right here. Again, this is the area we had the July peak, and again, it was our pullback just before the election, which I talked about at great length and detail with that bullish divergence. We'd likely see a rally with the presidential election and the Fed, rally with the presidential election and a pullback with the Fed. We ended up getting a rally with both, and then we reached those extremes. And I told you, again, we were going to get a pullback. Or last Thursday, again, a bigger pullback. I said with the NASDAQ. Again, we could be forming a very large divergence here. We're now in positive territory with the MACD. So again, the bounce off our 200-period moving average here just below gap support very well could hold if we can continue to build upon the rally. Here it is up close. Again, filling the gap. Let me move that so you can see it. Again, NASDAQ did not fill the gap yet. S&P did today, intraday, and then we closed just right underneath it, 59.49 rounding up, and again, that 59.49 area. I told you back over here, if we bounced off gap support and our 200 period, that could end the selling, resume the advance to go make new all-time highs. I told you, though, we still have this trend line to contend with and this gap fill down here, but they may not be filled until a later date. We'll be watching these levels if we start selling off. Again, regardless how the correction completed with the channel breakout back test, bounce off the 200, and now rally back up. However it completes, I still think we're likely going to make new all-time highs. We're going to see manipulation next week on very, very light volume. Very well could take us all-time highs. Investors taking us higher maybe on lighter volume, which is usually the case as the big institutional players take an extended vacation. We'll be watching these lows right here, but right now we're bouncing off gap support in the 200-period moving average. Watching to see if we try to climb back up towards this upper boundary going into next week. We'll be watching. The rally now tries to resume on lighter volume going up towards this area. If we go up towards this area, again, we can go into the 6,100 range as I've been talking about. That could take us to the upper boundary of the channel in the weekly time frame and overthrow the trend line in the monthly time frame, as I've been talking about. Take us towards these trend lines right here. Again, I have this one back over here from the previous highs made earlier in the year, March and July. And again, it's pointing up into this level, just overthrowing it a little bit. If I include the shadow, if I exclude it, it's pretty much right at that level. Then we have the blue upper channel line, again, parallel to the lower boundary here and the lower boundary here from the 2022 low and the 2023 low. And the peaks back over here. And again, you got a really nice looking channel. We could be making our way up into that level, and that may take us into the 6100 area. We're forming this really nice looking divergence right here. Multiple point divergence. But when you're looking at the weekly chart, you only get 1 bar per week because it's taking its time forming. That's why I keep saying the market, S&P, is going to move to new all-time highs over and over again. I think we're getting a blow-off top. And again, the blow-off top, big surge in the market, end of the bull market to complete the top, to suck everybody in and create total complacency. These divergences are going to play out. Like I keep saying, I think that we're still topping process phase. Still think we're going to new all-time highs. A good chance of that going into the holiday week here. Again, the S&P has not reached the upper end of my target level yet. It's likely going to do it. It fell just short of it. May even overthrow the trend line, move into the 6100 range, as high as 6199. The trend line's coming in around 6040. We fell just short of that trend line, long-term trend line, nearly 100 years old. Still may reach it. And again, don't start selling off and getting a topping tail next week. Close the month strong. Again, the target right here, the 6040 trend line, it goes a little bit higher. Every month it goes just a little bit higher. With this bar, it was just under 6,000. Here, it's at around 6,040. Here, if we carried it into December, it would be just slightly higher. But that 6,000 area on into the 6,100 range is where I think we're going to see the peak happen near this trend line, and then I think we're going to turn. See how we close the week out. Do we close with the topping tail and reversal and end up selling off Thanksgiving week, or do we close out strong and the monthly bar is strong? We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. Because we haven't reached this trend line yet, I still think we're going to.